Show Jerry what for and give old Adolf a swift kick in the pants. We're taking a quick peek at Raid World War II. Raid World War II is a cooperative 4-player first-person shooter developed by Lion Game Lion and published by Starbreeze Studios. I specifically mention Starbreeze Studios due to how Lion Game Lion came into existence in the first place and the kind of game they created for their first full project. Located in Croatia, Lion Game Lion was created in 2014 and consists of many members from another one of Starbreeze's studios, Overkill Software. In 2011, Overkill began breaking into the public eye with the release of Payday the Heist, a cooperative 4-player first-person shooter where players take on the roles of criminals and attempt to pull off different heists, such as robbing a bank or helping a prisoner escape.
Delivered.
Payday's basic gameplay was built off of horde mode mechanics, a type of game that became popular with titles like Tripwire's Killing Floor and Valve's Left 4 Dead series. Payday kinda fell into a middle ground between these two games by offering more in-depth objectives with an overall goal than Killing Floor's Kill Everything and Stay Alive, but also having smaller, bite-sized chunks than the longer levels or chapters of Left 4 Dead. Payday the Heist, while limited in content, did well enough that Overkill released a sequel in 2013 that's still going strong around 5 years later. Lion Game Lion's first projects were working on content for Payday 2. They worked on the game's Sizzling Barbecue Pack, the missions within the Bomb Heist DLC, as well as the Golden Grin Casino Heist. With the developers' experience of the mechanics of this kind of game, a game about 4 players working as a team to complete tasks within multiple missions that consisted of ever-spawning enemies to kill, they began work on a similar game of their own and released Raid World War II in 2017. I'm unsure whose idea the game was in the first place, if Starbreeze saw the popularity of Payday 2 and wanted to capitalize on it with another game in that style, or if Lion Game Lion wanted to branch out on their own and stuck with what they knew for Raid World War II, but it's impossible to not see the comparisons between both franchises. They both are first-person shooters that revolve around 4-player co-op and missions to complete, but Raid World War II really does try to stand out on its own, to be somewhat of a different experience than just a reskin of Payday. While Raid World War II uses a hub area that players can launch different missions from, it has somewhat of a developing story throughout it, but only somewhat. The overall premise of the game is that players take on the role of 4 members of the Raid Gang, a group of unscrupulous individuals from multiple countries who have all come together to do as much damage to the Third Reich as possible under the supervision of the Allies. The entire thing seems to have been set up by the British and is watched over by an individual called Control, who just so happens to be played by none other than John Cleese in live-action cutscenes, while the Raid team themselves don't claim any of their actions for any specific country and instead work as a third-party entity all on their own. Control and their main contact, Mrs. White, handle setting up each mission as well as assisting when things get dicey.
Doing is winning this war. Churchill has given us a mission. Attack the Reich any way we can. In short, set Europe ablaze, as it were. Our target, Hitler.
There are a limited amount of cutscenes with Control, though, and most things are handled by Mrs. White, who only ever appears as a voice on the radio. Perhaps the developers found it too expensive to record a multitude of scenes with Cleese, or they just couldn't think of anything more for him to say since his scenes are short, repetitive, as well as few and far between. He really only ever shows up whenever the player has unlocked a new mission, and only to say that you've unlocked a new mission and that Mrs. White will fill you in on the details.
Well, Mrs. White as the infeld.
This isn't the only time that Cleese has shown up in a game published by Starbreeze either, since he played the role of the butler in Payday 2's Safe House, and that character not only states that he's the grandson of Control, but also constantly speaks about the different members and missions taking place within the game.
My grandfather was in charge of some secret squad during the war, the Raid Gang. All very hush-hush back then, but I'm sure the stories will come out.
This leads me to believe that both Raid and Payday take place within the same universe, just at different time periods. That, or it's just a slick bit of advertising. Control isn't the only person to get live-action cutscenes in Raid World War II, as every time players finish a mission, they get to see how Hitler himself reacts to the news of their success. These bits, just like Control's, are short and rather repetitive. They do a decent job at being funny, but there really aren't enough of them for one to play at the end of every successful mission, and the acting in them is just kinda okay. While none of the player characters get any live-action time, they sure do get a lot across with their personalities. There's only 4 playable characters: the American, the Russian, the German, and the Brit. I honestly can't remember their names outside of Wolfgang, who is a defective Nazi now working for the Allies. The reason why I remember his name is because he never freaking shuts up. None of them really do. There's almost always someone saying something, and Wolfgang feels like he always has to yell about it. Even when doing something as simple as reloading your gun, your character has to say something, and while many games do that, Raid World War II feels like it's necessary to have one of the other characters respond to this by chastising whoever said it and wondering why they said it in the first place.
1 second. You quit.
I find it rather unnecessary. Levels themselves are very objective-focused, either moving into an area to interact with something or holding out in an area for a specific amount of time. Missions are rather varied with some progression to them, even though multiple missions take place in the same space. One mission has players blowing up part of a bridge to destroy a train, while another mission has them escorting a truck across the same bridge, but this time having to navigate around the hole they made previously. It's kind of a neat idea, except you could play missions in different orders depending upon if you've unlocked them or not, so you could have to escort the truck across the bridge before you blew the hole in it, which sorta ruins any sort of story progression. The levels also play very similar in both situations due to how basic the game's enemies are.
Hurry it up. Look for planks or something, chaps.
Since the game is set in World War II, enemies are limited to some kind of human soldier, and while Raid World War II has some information players can read in their hideout about each kind of enemy, they all really act the same. The game really tries to overwhelm players with enemies instead of giving them anything really all that difficult to deal with. And for some unknown reason, enemy soldiers are highly attracted to machine gun placements even if there's nothing for them to shoot at when they get there. The only time I ever had to really change the tactics I was using is if a tank showed up, but since those are glorified set pieces and missions, they can't be dealt with like a regular enemy. Even these big flamethrower-wielding soldiers who seem like they're supposed to be a real threat kinda aren't, and I can just stand back and shoot at them like everything else until they die. The Axis can also throw out flares to call in artillery strikes, which is helpful so you know where the guns are going to shoot, but if someone manages to put the flare out in time before they fire, then you stop them entirely. It's a neat idea, but not quite enough to keep things all that interesting. Players can pick from 4 different classes with 4 different specialties, and while it seems like each class is supposed to be associated with a different character, they aren't connected, so you can play as any class with any character if you want to. Each class also has a special ability that can be charged up to 8 players in a fight. The RECON class focuses on sniper rifles and has the sharpshooter ability that gives themselves aim assist while increasing their team's range damage. The Insurgent can use Untouchable to decrease damage they take while making their team move a little bit faster. Assault is more of a frontline class whose berserk ability heals teammates and lets them shoot without using as much ammo per shot. And finally, the Demolitions class is all about blowing things up. This class allows players to use an ability called Ignition that lets their grenades explode multiple times and increases damage resistance to everyone else. Each class can only use specific weapons associated with that class, and they all have to be leveled up individually to unlock the weapons they can use. Even if you've unlocked something like the Thompson submachine gun for one class, none of the other classes can use it until they unlock it themselves. Each one can also be upgraded through proficiencies, but they're the same regardless of what you're playing as, which really is a big missed opportunity in my opinion. Weapons can also be upgraded over time, but only by completing specific challenges. All of the challenges are rather basic and mostly boil down to kill a large amount of enemies in a certain way with that weapon, and each weapon has the same general challenges to complete. The annoying thing is that challenges themselves have to be unlocked by leveling up a class. So if one challenge needs players to kill, say, 1,000 enemies using hipfire, and they haven't leveled up enough to unlock that challenge yet, then you can't make any progress on it until you do, meaning any previous hipfire kills with that weapon don't add to it, and it makes me kind of feel like I'm wasting my time. Grinding is really the name of the game with Raid World War II. You grind for levels, you grind for weapons, you grind for proficiencies, and grind for weapon upgrades. The game really wants you to play its missions over and over and over again for experience points, and while they are initially interesting, neither missions nor the game's gunplay is all that to keep me wanting to play it. To add some variety to things, there are different cards that can be activated when someone creates a mission, either single player with bots or multiplayer with other people. And these cards change some things, but from what I've seen, they're sorta crap. There's one where enemies only take damage from grenades or melee attacks, but ammo pickups will always give you grenades, and that just seems kind of dumb. Cards are broken up into two groups to match the two different categories of missions. Single missions with one main objective, or a longer campaign of multiple missions with multiple objectives to complete. Campaigns have players going through multiple maps or driving around the streets of Berlin, and I found them to be both more fun and rewarding than the one-off missions. Being on the same engine as Payday 2, the driving in Raid World War II is rather similar, having one player drive the vehicle while others are passengers and can lean out of the car to shoot at enemies. Payday only had a limited use of vehicles for specific missions, while Raid has a much more expansive open area with the streets of Berlin for players to drive around in when they need to. It's nothing all that fancy, but it gets the job done and does add some nice variety to what you're doing. In my 7 hours with the game, I only ended up replaying a mission once or twice, be that single missions or campaign missions, and I never really had any interest in playing any of them a second or third time. There are multiple difficulties to choose from for missions, with easy and normal unlocked at the start, but the only way to play harder difficulties is to have already beaten the mission or the previous difficulty. So to play on hard mode, you gotta have beaten the mission on normal. Since I didn't really want to replay the missions in the first place, I had a rather easy time with the game as a whole, playing it on the normal difficulty. I don't think I ever died once, and was only knocked down a handful of times. Teammates can revive players if they get to them within a short period of time of them running out of health, and even with bots, I found it really hard to lose a mission, which just killed any sense of challenge the game had. I just really don't understand having to unlock difficulty modes on a mission-by-mission basis for a game like this. It doesn't make any sense to me. I guess it's so players can kind of get an idea of what a mission is before they go into it at a high level, but like I said before, it just ruined the challenge and made the game kind of boring, to be honest. Overall, Raid World War II is a very okay co-op first-person shooter. It's competent in what it does, looks good, sounds good, and all that, but I can't say I was all that engaged really playing it. Its gunplay and enemy design leaves a lot to be desired unlike other Horde mode games, and nothing really makes you have to think how to deal with it. You just kinda shoot till you eventually win. A game like Left 4 Dead 2 had specific enemies designed for splitting up groups of players as they made their way through a level, so players had to specifically work together to actually make progress. On the other hand, Killing Floor's enemies had different attacks and resistances which changed how players had to deal with them, even though the goal of that game was mostly to stay put. Even Payday the Heist and Payday 2 had enemies who specifically stuck out and had to be dealt with differently, while Raid World War II just doesn't have anything like that at all. It's kind of a shame since the developers did do a good job of capturing the feel and atmosphere of running around behind enemy lines, sabotaging the Axis, and on paper, the game seems like a really good idea. On top of all the grinding, there's also Nazi gold and dog tags sprinkled throughout each level that can be collected, but they're kind of pointless. Gold can only be spent on customizing the hideout or buying different clothes for a character, and nothing that can be bought really feels all that worth it to me. Clothing options are pretty basic and limited, and have to be unlocked on a per-class basis, while the hideout upgrades mostly just take what's there and paint it gold. If you're someone who's okay with doing the same thing over and over again for grinding in video games, and you're looking for a co-op experience similar in style to Payday but with a different theme, then Raid World War II may be something you'd be interested in. In my opinion, however, the game just doesn't do enough to stand out from the pack of other Horde mode games, or even from Payday for that matter. It's just not all that satisfying to play for as long as it wants you to, and I don't see myself really ever going back to it. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think of the game or this video in the comments section. I'm MegapieMan, and I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more quick peeks? Click on the video on the left for Bridge Constructor Portal, a game about building bridges while thinking with portals. Or click on the video on the right for Day of Infamy, a realistically focused World War II multiplayer first-person shooter.